The morning sun stretched across the airfield like liquid gold, glinting off the metal bodies of helicopters lined up in perfect military precision. The rhythmic hum of engines warming filled the air, a familiar sound that carried both comfort and danger. Captain Rachel Monroe walked across the tarmac, her helmet tucked under her arm, boots striking a confident beat. She looked calm, but her eyes, sharp and steady, told another story. They held memories, the kind pilots never speak of aloud. It was supposed to be a simple mission, a standard transport and extraction, nothing unusual, nothing heroic. Her UH-60 Black Hawk would carry medical supplies to a forward post and pick up a recon team stationed in the mountains. Simple on paper. Routine, they said. But Rachel had learned long ago that in war zones, routine was the most dangerous word in the dictionary. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Harris, was young and eager, new to the field, still treating danger like an adventure. "Clear skies, Captain," he said with a grin as he climbed into his seat. "Feels like a good day to fly." Rachel gave a faint smile, strapping in. Every day's a good day, until it's not. They lifted off just after dawn, the rotors cutting through the still morning air. Below them, the rugged mountain range stretched endlessly, a mix of jagged cliffs and mist-filled valleys. From up here, it looked peaceful. But Rachel knew better. She'd flown over these ridges before, where peace was often just the quiet before chaos. As they climbed higher, Harris hummed a tune through the comms, and the crew exchanged light jokes to pass time. The radio crackled with friendly chatter from another helicopter in the convoy. Eagle 2, piloted by an old friend of Rachel's, Captain Laura Kent. "Ghost Talk, you copy?" Laura's voice teased over the radio, using Rachel's old call sign, one she hadn't heard in years. Rachel chuckled softly. "Don't start with that nickname again. I'm just a transport pilot now." "Yeah, right," Laura laughed. Tried to act normal for once. Everything seemed fine. The hum of the rotors, the gentle vibration through the floor, the faint static of radio traffic, all perfectly ordinary. But halfway through the range, the weather began to change. The first sign was subtle, a flicker on the radar. Then, a strange shimmer of gray on the horizon. Harris frowned, tapping the screen. Captain, that cell wasn't in the forecast." Rachel glanced out the window. The sky ahead was darkening fast, clouds thickening like smoke. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Wind buffeted the helicopter, tossing it like a leaf in a storm. "Eagle 2, report position," she called into the mic. Static answered. Then, a faint, broken voice. "May, day. Engine." The rest was swallowed by interference. Rachel's pulse spiked. That was Lara. She leaned forward, scanning the gray swirl ahead. "Tried to get a fix on their beacon." "Copy, Captain," Harris replied, fingers flying over controls. "I've got a signal?" "Weak southeast, oh no." Through the mist, a flash of orange flame tore the clouds open. A helicopter, Eagle 2, was spiraling down, smoke trailing from its tail like a dying comet. "God," Harris whispered. "They're going down." Rachel didn't hesitate. "Strap in. We're going after them." "Captain, command says to hold position." A voice snapped over the radio. "We can't risk another bird in this storm." But Rachel had already turned her controls, banking sharply toward the smoke. Her helicopter tilted dangerously, alarms blaring as she descended into the storm. "They won't make it if we wait," she said calmly. "I'm not letting them die out there." The rain came down in sheets, hammering against the cockpit glass. The horizon vanished completely. Lightning flashed close enough to shake the instrument panel. Harris gritted his teeth, white-knuckled on the controls. "This is suicide." Rachel's voice stayed level. Not if we're faster than the storm. The chopper plunged through clouds, blades slicing through violent gusts. Every second counted. Her mind raced with calculations, altitude, descent rate, wind vectors. Years of instinct took over. She remembered a night long ago, another crash, another storm, when she'd made a similar choice. That one hadn't ended well. But she wasn't going to relive that mistake. Not again. Visual on wreckage. Harris shouted suddenly. Through the blur of rain, Rachel saw it. The spinning silhouette of Eagle 2, tail gone, plummeting toward jagged rocks below. Her friend's voice crackled weakly over the comms. This is Eagle 2, losing altitude. Can't control. Rachel's jaw tightened. Hang on, Lavra, I've got you. She radioed the falling chopper directly. Lavra, listen to me. Cut your power, stabilize your pitch, don't fight the spin. Trust me. There was silence, and Laura's faint, terrified voice. Rachel, what are you doing? Buying you time, Rachel replied. Ignoring every safety protocol, Rachel pulled her own chopper lower, dangerously close to the dying aircraft. She adjusted her altitude until her rotor wash pushed against the airflow beneath the spinning bird, creating enough upward force to slow its fall, a move so precise that even the slightest misjudgment could send both helicopters crashing. Now, pull your nose up on my mark, Rachel ordered. 3, 2, 1. Now. Lavra followed instinctively. The falling chopper steadied for a split second, just enough. Jump! Get your crew out! Rachel shouted. Tiny black figures leapt from the doomed aircraft, parachutes deploying amid the storm. Seconds later, Eagle 2 struck the mountainside and erupted in a ball of fire. The shockwave slammed Rachel's chopper sideways, alarms blaring. Harris fought the controls, yelling, "We're hit." Rachel's hands moved with razor precision, countering the spin, pulling them out of the dive. Her eyes burned from the smoke and flashing light, but her voice stayed calm. We're not done yet. Find their coordinates. We're bringing them home. When they finally leveled out, the storm was beginning to clear. The wreckage burned below, glowing like a warning beacon. Through the drifting smoke, Rachel spotted movement, survivors waving from a rocky ledge. Relief washed through her chest. Got them, Harris said hoarsely. 4 alive. Rachel nodded, her jaw set. Then we're not leaving without them. As she circled lower, she could see their faces illuminated by the flickering fire. Exhausted, bloodied, but alive. Lavra looked up, eyes meeting Rachel's through the glass canopy. Even from a distance, Rachel could see the disbelief and gratitude in her expression. The radio crackled again. Command was furious. Captain Monroe, you directly disobeyed orders. You risked, Rachel cut the line. Copy that, she said flatly. Mission in progress. Her focus narrowed to the landing zone, a strip barely wide enough for her skids. She lowered the bird carefully, balancing between crosswinds and uneven ground. The rotors whipped debris across the ledge, but she didn't flinch. Crew, prepare for extraction, she ordered. We're bringing them home. The helicopter touched down hard, rocking on impact. Gunfire echoed faintly from the valley. Hostiles were closing in. But Rachel didn't care. She'd made it here once. She could make it out. As the rescued soldiers climbed aboard, drenched and shaking, Rachel allowed herself one brief glance at the flames in the distance, the remains of Eagle 2, and she gripped the controls again, eyes cold and focused. Hold tight, she told her crew. This storm isn't done yet. The Black Hawk roared back into the air, blades cutting through rain and fire. The sky behind her burned orange, and the survivors watched in stunned silence. For Rachel Monroe, it was just another mission. For everyone else, it was the start of a legend. Rain hammered the cockpit like 1,000 needles, and the helicopter trembled under the violence of the storm. Every gust felt like a punch from the sky, every flash of lightning a reminder that they were flying inside a death trap. Yet Captain Rachel Monroe's hands were steady on the controls, her eyes locked on the faint beacon blinking on the radar, the signal from the downed helicopter's transponder. "Altitude dropping fast," Lieutenant Harris called out, his voice strained. "They're below 2,000 feet and descending." Rachel's pulse quickened. "They won't make it to the valley floor. Get me a visual." "I'm trying." Harris fought with the scope, squinting through the blinding rain. "There, I've got eyes on them. Southeast ridge, half a mile. They're spinning." Rachel shoved the throttle forward. "Hang on." The Black Hawk lurched through the storm, rotors howling like tortured metal. Wind tore across the fuselage, and visibility shrank to almost nothing. But Rachel's instincts, sharpened through years of impossible missions, guided her through the chaos. She knew this feeling, the thin line between life and death, the cold calm that came when fear had no room left to breathe. Below, through the gray mist, the crippled helicopter was a blur of smoke and fire. Its tail had snapped clean off. The rotors were spinning freely, dragging the craft into a deadly spiral. Every second meant another 100 feet lost. "Eagle 2, do you copy?" Rachel shouted into the mic. Through static, a broken voice answered, "This is Eagle 2 engines failing." "Can't control?" Rachel pressed the transmit button tighter. "Lavra, it's Rachel. Listen to me. Cut your throttle. Don't fight the spin. Stabilize your pitch." "Rachel? We're losing altitude." "I know. You've got maybe 30 seconds. Do exactly what I say." Her words were calm, measured, commanding, the tone of someone who had been here before too many times. Harris looked at her, eyes wide. "Captain, what are you doing?" "Saving them." He hesitated, scanning the altitude gauge. "We'll get caught in their downdraft. If they hit us, then we die trying," Rachel said, voice sharp. "Adjust flaps to 20. Bring us down on their left." The Black Hawk tilted dangerously as she maneuvered closer, rain slamming against the windshield. Alarms blared as turbulence rocked the cabin. The horizon was gone. There was only wind, fire, and falling metal. 10 seconds. Harris shouted. Rachel focused on the spinning aircraft, calculating the descent speed. "Too fast," she muttered. "We need to counter their airflow." "What?" She didn't answer. She yanked the cyclic back, adjusting her own rotors, so the downwash from her helicopter pushed upward against the falling one. It was madness, using her helicopter's rotor pressure to manipulate the air around another aircraft. But Rachel wasn't thinking about the odds. She was thinking about Laura, her friend, her wing partner, the woman she'd flown with through deserts, storms, and classified operations no one would ever speak of. "Lavra, listen," Rachel said into the radio, voice steady despite the chaos. "When I say go, pull your nose up 5 degrees. Trust me." "Rachel, you'll crash if you trust me." Lightning flashed, illuminating both helicopters, locked in a deadly dance. Rachel's grip tightened on the controls. "Now! Pull up now!" For one impossible moment, both aircrafts aligned. The falling helicopter's nose lifted slightly as Rachel's rotor wash struck it from below. The descent slowed, the spin steadied, just enough for Laura's crew to hit the release on their side doors. "Eject!" Rachel shouted. "Get out now." Tiny black figures leapt into the storm, parachutes whipping open like ghosts. "Come on," Rachel whispered, watching through rain-streaked glass. "Come on." Seconds later, Eagle 2 struck the mountainside and erupted in a massive fireball. The explosion's shockwaves slammed into Rachel's helicopter, tossing it sideways. "Brace!" she yelled. The cabin filled with alarms. Harris fought the controls, shouting over the roar. "We're hit. Systems warning." Rachel's entire body moved on instinct, correcting the yaw, redistributing power, forcing the chopper back into balance. Her arms trembled from the effort, but she never lost control. The storm swallowed the explosion's echo, leaving only the relentless sound of rain. For a few seconds, there was silence, eerie, hollow silence. Then, faintly through the comms, a voice crackled. "This is Lieutenant Parker. We're on the ground. 4 survivors. Thank you, Ghost Hawk." Rachel froze at the name, a name she hadn't heard spoken out loud in years. Her heart skipped a beat. "Coordinates?" she asked quickly. "Grid 47, Southeast Ridge. We're pinned near the wreckage." "Copy that," Rachel said. She exhaled slowly, pushing the thought of that nickname aside. "Hold your position. We're coming for you." Harris turned to her, eyes full of disbelief. "You just saved an entire crew, Captain. You realize that?" Rachel didn't respond. She adjusted her flight path and began their descent. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, every motion deliberate, rehearsed. But inside, her thoughts churned. Ghost Hawk. The word echoed in her head like a ghost from another life. Years ago, during her time in covert operations, that had been her call sign, a pilot who flew unregistered missions, rescuing people the government couldn't admit existed. It was a name that belonged to someone else now, someone she'd buried when she left the Black Ops world behind. And yet, somehow, that name had followed her back into the storm. As they approached the ridge, flashes of gunfire lit the fog below. Harris's voice trembled. "They're under attack." Rachel's focus snapped back to the present. "Arm-side guns. We're going in. Captain, we're running on fumes." "Command said." Rachel cut him off. "I don't care what Command said. We're bringing them home." Her helicopter descended low, rotors slicing through smoke and wind. The ground came into view. Twisted metal, scorched earth, and 4 soldiers huddled behind wreckage, firing toward unseen hostiles. Gunners suppressing fire. Rachel ordered. The Black Hawk's side guns erupted, spraying the ridge with controlled bursts. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off rocks. The trapped soldiers waved frantically, signaling. Rachel angled the helicopter closer, barely 10 feet above the ground. "Harris, hold her steady." He gritted his teeth, sweat streaming down his face. "Trying." The skids scraped against loose gravel as the helicopter hovered, buffeted by the wind. "Go, go, go." Rachel shouted. The side doors slid open, and her crew reached out, pulling the wounded soldiers aboard one by one. Rachel's hands never left the controls, her eyes never blinked. Every second they stayed on that ridge was a gamble with death. "Last man aboard." The crew chief called. "Hold tight." Rachel yelled. She pulled the chopper upward in a sharp climb, bullets streaking past the cockpit. The engines screamed in protest, but the bird obeyed. Within seconds, the burning valley dropped away beneath them. Only when they were clear of the mountain did Rachel finally exhale. The adrenaline drained from her body, leaving only the heavy thud of her heartbeat and the pounding rain. In the back, one of the rescued soldiers, Lieutenant Parker, looked forward through the cabin, studying her face. "Captain," he said quietly, "how did you do that? That maneuver, slowing a fall midder, that's not even in the manuals." Rachel didn't answer. She just adjusted her heading toward base. Harris turned slightly, still trembling from the chaos. "He's right, Captain. No one flies like that. I mean, who taught you that?" Rachel's eyes flicked to the horizon, her face unreadable. Let's just say, I've had practice. The storm began to thin, revealing streaks of dawn light cutting through the clouds. The air grew calmer, but the cabin was heavy with silence. For the rest of the flight, no one spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic beat of the rotors and the faint, distant rumble of thunder fading behind them, like the echo of something that refused to die. As the base came into view, Rachel finally allowed herself a breath of relief. The radio crackled to life, command demanding reports, explanations, and justification for her disobedience. She ignored it. Her eyes stayed on the horizon, calm and unblinking. She'd saved them all, and that was enough. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The name Ghost Hawk had surfaced again, and this time, it wouldn't fade quietly into the clouds. The base control tower came into view, just as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thinning storm clouds. The storm had calmed, but inside Captain Rachel Monroe's Black Hawk, the air was anything but peaceful. The cabin smelled of smoke, metal, and burnt oil. Her hands, still firm on the cyclic, trembled slightly, the adrenaline refusing to fade. Behind her, the 4 rescued soldiers sat slumped against the cabin wall. Their uniforms were torn, faces streaked with mud and blood, eyes hollow from shock. But they were alive, breathing proof that the impossible could be done. "Captain, command's been calling nonstop," said Lieutenant Harris, removing his headset for a moment. "They want to debrief as soon as we touch down." Rachel didn't respond. Her focus remained fixed on the horizon, where distant lightning still flickered like a warning. She wasn't thinking about the storm. She was thinking about Lavra, her friend, the pilot she couldn't save. She adjusted the throttle, bringing the helicopter down for landing. The skids kissed the ground, and the rotors began to slow. Medics rushed in immediately, pulling the survivors out one by one. Cameras flashed, commanders shouted orders, and the chaos of rescue turned to routine once more. Rachel remained in her seat, helmet still on, staring blankly ahead. The moment she shut off the engine, silence filled her ears. The kind of silence that only comes after surviving something you shouldn't have. But that silence didn't last long. "Captain Monroe," a voice barked from outside. "Command wants you in the Situation Room now." Rachel unclipped her harness and stepped down, boots hitting the soaked concrete. Her uniform clung to her from rain and sweat, her face streaked with grime. The base's personnel watched her in awe as she walked past, whispers following her like shadows. "Is that her? The pilot who saved Eagle 2? "Yeah, they say she flew into the crash zone. I heard she used her rotor wash to stop the fall. That's impossible." Rachel ignored the chatter. She'd learned long ago that people love legends more than truth. Inside the debriefing room, the air was heavy with tension. Screens displayed radar logs and storm footage. A senior officer, Colonel Reeves, stood waiting, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Captain Monroe," he began. "You disobeyed a direct order." Rachel met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, sir. You risked your aircraft, your crew, and violated airspace protocols." "Yes, sir." Reeves narrowed his eyes. "And in doing so, you saved 4 lives." Rachel said nothing. She didn't need to. The colonel sighed, rubbing his temples. "You make my job difficult, Captain. Half the command wants to court-martial you for insubordination. The other half wants to pin a medal to your chest." Rachel finally spoke, her tone calm and quiet. "With respect, sir, I didn't do it for medals." Reeves studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "Dismissed. Report back at 0800 for full documentation." She turned to leave, but as she did, he added softly, "You've done this before, haven't you?" Rachel froze mid-step. "Sir?" "That maneuver, the one you pulled to slow their fall." That's not standard Army protocol. In fact, I've never seen anyone attempt it outside of classified Black Ops flight programs. Her jaw tightened. I was trained to keep my crew alive, sir. Reeves didn't press further, but his eyes followed her as she walked out, the same way a man might look at something both dangerous and extraordinary. That night, as the base lights dimmed, the rescued soldiers gathered in the mess hall. They were bandaged, exhausted, and still processing what had happened. Lieutenant Parker, the one who'd called her Ghost Hawk, sat quietly at the table, staring into his coffee. "You really think it's her?" asked one of the others. Parker nodded slowly. "The way she flew. It wasn't luck. That's trained instinct. I've read reports about a covert pilot, the kind they deny even exists. Ghost Hawk was her call sign. But those were just rumors," another soldier said. "Stories from ops that never made it into the records." Parker met his gaze. "Yeah, but she didn't deny it, did she?" Their conversation drifted into silence, each man lost in thought. Meanwhile, Rachel sat alone in her quarters, the dim lamplight casting long shadows across the room. Her flight suit hung by the door, still damp. On the desk sat a small metal case, old, dented, and locked. Her hand hovered over it. For years, she'd kept it closed, a coffin for memories best forgotten. But tonight, something inside her stirred, the same pull she'd felt when Laura's chopper went down. She unlocked the latch. Inside lay a single photograph, a younger Rachel standing beside an unmarked Black Hawk, the tail number scratched off. Around her stood a team of soldiers in black gear, faces blurred or missing. On her shoulder patch were the faded letters, R.W. Raven Wing. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers tracing the outline. Those missions were ghosts, the kind of stories that lived only in whispers. She'd been part of an elite, off-the-record rescue program designed for situations too dangerous, too political, or too secret for official involvement. They called them the Invisible Wings, pilots who didn't exist, flying missions that never happened. Ghost Hawk had been her name then, the one whispered in emergency channels when no one else could make it in or out alive. She closed the case slowly and exhaled. "I thought I left you behind," she murmured. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Harris, holding a clipboard. "Sorry to bother you, Captain. They need your flight log. Command's processing your mission report." Rachel nodded. "Leave it on the table." He hesitated. "Captain, what you did today, I've never seen anything like it. You saved us all." But? Harris glanced at the metal case on her desk, then back at her. "Those moves, the way you flew, where did you learn that?" Rachel met his gaze. For a second, he saw something in her eyes, not arrogance or pride, but the heavy weight of someone who'd carried too much for too long. "Experience," she said finally. "Now get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow's another flight day." He nodded reluctantly and left. Rachel stood by the window, watching the night sky. The storm had passed, but distant thunder still rolled along the horizon, like a memory that refused to fade. She knew tomorrow, the whispers would spread across the base. Pilots would trade stories, soldiers would exchange theories, and someone would eventually dig too deep. The truth never stayed buried forever. And when it came out, when they realized who she really was, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Rachel walked through the hangar, where mechanics were repairing her helicopter. The crew saluted her as she passed, a sign of respect, but also of curiosity. Her name was already legend. She stopped by the Black Hawk, running her hand along the fuselage. A fresh patch of bullet holes marked the side panel. The metal was scorched, but intact, just like her. "Hell of a flight, Captain," said the crew chief, wiping his hands. I heard you went straight into a crash zone. That's something only the old ghosts used to do. Rachel gave a small smile. Old ghosts? Yeah, he said. You know, the ones from those off-book ops. The ones no one talks about. She didn't answer, just nodded and walked away. As she stepped out into the sunlight, she could feel eyes on her from across the flight line. Pilots, commanders, even intelligence officers. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Ghost Hawk was back. They didn't know the full story. Not yet, but soon they would. And once they did, they'd understand. She wasn't just a pilot. She was the storm that saved them all. Morning came softly to the base, golden sunlight spilling across rows of steel-gray aircraft, the rhythmic hum of engines, and the faint smell of jet fuel hanging in the air. For most, it was a normal day of drills and flight checks. But beneath that calm, an unspoken tension rippled through every corridor. Captain Rachel Monroe had become a legend overnight. The story of her rescue mission, how she flew into a collapsing storm to save an entire crew, spread faster than official reports could contain. Commanders called it reckless bravery. The pilots called it impossible. But among the fighter wings, whispers began to circulate, whispers that carried a single name, Ghost Hawk. At first, Rachel tried to ignore it. She attended her debriefings, filled out flight logs, even joined morning briefings as if nothing had changed. But she could feel the eyes on her. Wherever she went, conversations hushed. People turned their heads as she passed. The military had a way of building myths around heroes, but Rachel had spent her life hiding from one. In the intelligence building, Major Eric Daniels, a tactical analyst for the Air Force, was reviewing classified footage from the rescue mission. He wasn't supposed to, the feed was restricted to high-clearance personnel, but he'd heard enough rumors to be curious. He watched closely as Rachel's Black Hawk appeared on the screen, diving straight into the storm's heart. The telemetry data showed impossible readings. Wind shear at 70 knots, airspeed fluctuating wildly, the kind of turbulence that tore helicopters apart. Yet she had flown through it, steady, surgical, deliberate. Daniels leaned forward, slowing the footage frame by frame. The flight pattern wasn't random. It was calculated, a precise spiral descent maneuver he recognized instantly. His pulse quickened. That was Raven Wing Protocol, Delta 7, a maneuver used only by the off-book aviation unit, rumored to operate under JSOC command, the one most officers denied even existed. Jesus, he muttered. Who the hell is she? Meanwhile, on the tarmac, two fighter pilots, Lieutenant Nick Alvarez and Captain Julia Hawk Sanders, were pre-flighting their F-16S when the conversation turned to the topic everyone was whispering about. I saw the footage, Julia said, strapping on her helmet. She flew like she knew every wind current before it happened. Nick chuckled. Or like she's done it before. A lot. Julia glanced toward the hangar where Rachel's Black Hawk sat under maintenance. They say she was part of something called Raven Wing. Nick frowned. That's just a myth, Hawk. You've heard the stories. Ghost pilots, unmarked birds, missions that never show up on radar. People tell those to rookies. Maybe, Julia said softly. But someone once told me that myths usually start with truth. That afternoon, Rachel was summoned again, this time not to the command room, but to a restricted conference room in the operations wing. When she entered, Colonel Reeves was waiting, along with Major Daniels, whose expression was a careful blend of respect and suspicion. Have a seat, Captain, Reeves said. Rachel sat, posture straight, face calm. Reeves placed a folder on the table. I assume you know why you're here. No, sir. Daniels opened the folder. Inside were still frames of her flight data, annotated in red. These readings, this maneuver, where did you learn it? Rachel's face remained neutral. Sir, I was trained to adapt. We were losing altitude. I did what I had to. Daniels leaned forward. You did something no pilot in the U.S. Army Aviation School is even taught. That's not adaptation. That's expertise. Rachel didn't blink. Experience is a good teacher, Major. Reeves studied her quietly, then said, The Air Force wants to conduct a cross-branch review of your service record. They're requesting your personnel file. Rachel's pulse quickened, though her voice stayed calm. With respect, sir, my record is already classified above their clearance. Daniels raised an eyebrow. That's exactly what we found strange. The room went silent for a beat, the kind of silence that weighed heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Finally, Reeves sighed and closed the file. That's all for now, Captain. Dismissed. Rachel stood, saluted, and walked out, but she could feel their eyes following her. Outside the door, she allowed herself one quiet exhale. Her past, the one she had buried under years of standard service, was clawing its way back to the surface. That evening, the base's rec room buzzed with low chatter. A TV played muted news about global tensions overseas. Pilots lounged with coffee cups, but the air carried that familiar energy, the electric hum of rumors ready to ignite. Julia Hawk Sanders and Nick Alvarez sat together, reviewing flight simulations when Daniels entered the room. He looked around, then gestured for them to follow him to a quieter corner. You two were in the air during the rescue mission, right? Nick nodded. We were redirected due to the storm. Couldn't make visual contact. Daniels pulled a small tablet from his bag. You might want to see this. He played the classified clip again. The storm, the descent, the controlled chaos of Rachel's flight path. Both pilots watched in silence. That's not Army flight patterning, Julia whispered. That's special ops-level precision. Daniels nodded. Exactly. I cross-referenced the telemetry. There's only one other instance of this pattern, a covert extraction in Kandahar 5 years ago, classified under Raven Wing operations. Nick frowned. But Raven Wing was disbanded after 2017. The pilots disappeared. Daniels looked at him. Or they were reassigned under new identities. The realization hit Julia like cold air. You're saying Captain Monroe was one of them? Daniels didn't answer. He didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself. Back in her quarters, Rachel sat at her desk, reviewing mission paperwork she didn't care about. Her mind was somewhere else, back in the desert, in the cockpit of a silent bird that flew without insignia or acknowledgement. She remembered the sound of rotors slicing through night air, the voice of her old CO in her ear. You're invisible, Ghost Hawk. No names, no numbers. If you're caught, you never existed. That had been the price of serving in Raven Wing, to save others from the shadows, knowing no one would ever know. Now that shadow had found her again. Her communicator buzzed. It was a coded message, untraceable, the kind used only by those with top-tier clearance. The message was short, unsigned. They're looking for you. Protocol Emberfall, in effect. Burn everything. Rachel's breath caught. Emberfall was the emergency code used when a classified identity was at risk of exposure. She looked toward the small metal case on her desk, the one that held her Raven Wing insignia and the unmarked dog tags. Slowly, she reached for it, then stopped. No, she whispered. Not this time. She grabbed her jacket and stepped out of her quarters. Outside, the wind had picked up again, faint thunder rolling in the distance. Somewhere beyond the clouds, she could almost hear the echo of her past calling her name. Ghost Hawk wasn't supposed to exist anymore. But sometimes, legends don't fade. They return when the world needs them most. And as the base lights dimmed, Rachel Monroe, the woman who saved a crushing crew, began to realize she wasn't just running from her past. She was about to fly straight back into it, The base was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Captain Rachel Monroe walked through the empty hangar, her boots echoing against steel floors. The adrenaline from her last extraction mission had faded, leaving behind a heavy ache in her muscles and a heavier weight in her mind. She couldn't ignore the fact that Shadow Talon had resurfaced. Commander Vega's message haunted her. "They're looking for you." Protocol Emberfall in effect. Earn everything. The emergency protocol was simple. Disappear, erase traces, trust no one. But Rachel had never been the type to run. "We need to move fast," she muttered to herself, scanning the hangar for her gear. A small helicopter, stripped and camouflaged, waited silently in the shadows. Its rotors were cold, the controls untouched for months. Yet, as she ran her fingers along the dashboard, she felt a familiar pulse, the machine responding like an extension of her own body. Ghost Hawk's instincts were returning. She climbed aboard and powered up the aircraft, testing each system. Satellite feeds were scrambled, GPS signals blocked, the perfect cover. The target, Shadow Talon's new operations hub, deep in the northern mountain ranges. Intelligence suggested it was heavily guarded, protected not just by rogue operatives, but by someone with inside knowledge, someone who had betrayed Ravenwing in the past. "This isn't just an extraction," Rachel whispered to herself. "It's a reckoning." Lieutenant Harris, now her unofficial partner, climbed into the co-pilot seat. He had no idea of her full history, no knowledge of Ravenwing, but he trusted her implicitly. "Where exactly are we going, Captain?" Harris asked nervously. "Into the storm," she replied, her eyes cold and resolute. The flight was treacherous. Snowstorms and wind sheer tested every ounce of skill she possessed. Every maneuver she executed recalled the secret training she'd received years ago, unrecorded, classified, nearly forgotten by the world. Her hands moved instinctively, her eyes scanning for thermal signatures, anticipating threats before they became visible. Hours into the flight, a signal came through, encrypted, low power, impossible for standard military detection. It was from an unknown ally. RW operative. Coordinates updated. Approach cautiously. Shadow Talon has eyes everywhere. Rachel's jaw tightened. Ravenwing never left messages like this lightly. Every word was a warning. "Harris, you're going to need to trust me completely," she said. "I already do," he replied, gripping his seat. The mountains below were jagged, sharp, and unforgiving. Rachel navigated the Black Hawk through narrow passes, avoiding thermal detection and potential missile triggers. Each time a gust of wind hit, the aircraft groaned, testing both machine and pilot. Finally, they spotted the Shadow Talon outpost. Nestled between two cliffs, it was surrounded by motion sensors, camouflage drones, and a perimeter of armed guards. Rachel's heart pounded. This was not a rescue. This was infiltration. "We'll go in silent," she instructed. "One wrong move, and they'll know we're here. Then it's over." Harris swallowed hard. "How do you know this will work?" Rachel smiled faintly. "Because I've done it before. And I've survived worse." The approach was perilous. Using a combination of low-altitude flight and shadowed canyon routes, Rachel guided the helicopter to a hidden ledge overlooking the hub. She deployed remote drones to map the interior, cameras feeding real-time thermal data to her cockpit screen. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. Shadow Talon wasn't just operating. They were planning a strike against multiple U.S. military positions. And there, among them, she spotted a familiar insignia, a patch she had seen on someone she once trusted. Her stomach twisted. "It's someone from our side," she muttered, clenching her fists. "Who?" Harris asked, leaning in. "Someone I trusted," she said quietly. "Someone who left Ravenwing for reasons I didn't understand. Until now." The infiltration began. Rachel and Harris descended under cover of night, using thermal shields and silent grappling lines. They moved like shadows, dodging guards and avoiding cameras. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. Inside the compound, Rachel found documents, encrypted drives, and evidence of betrayals. Plans for attacks, black market deals, and personnel lists, all signed or sanctioned by Colonel Reeves. The man she had respected, even admired, had orchestrated much of this from behind the scenes. Anger surged. "He's been playing both sides," she whispered, "sending me into the fire to clean up his mistakes." Harris frowned. "Then what do we do?" "We finish this," she replied. "Tonight. No one else gets hurt if we stop him now." Rachel accessed one of the secure terminals, hacking into Shadow Talon's communication network. It was a delicate operation. One wrong keystroke, and the alarms would trigger. Within minutes, she had control of surveillance cameras, communications, and weapon systems. She smiled coldly. "We turned the hunters into the hunted." Using the compound's own systems, Rachel set traps and isolated enemy personnel. Guards were locked in secure rooms. Alarms redirected them into ambush zones. Shadow Talon had thought they were untouchable until Ghost Hawk arrived. The final confrontation loomed. Rachel could feel it, a mixture of anticipation, fear, and determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her team, for her country, and for the memory of Raven Wing. As the night wore on, the first confrontation occurred. Rachel disabled cameras, neutralized drones, and faced the first wave of Shadow Talon operatives. Harris provided cover fire while she moved with precision. Each encounter was over in seconds, her training, instinct, and experience unmatched. Finally, she reached the inner chamber, the room where the orchestrator of the betrayal waited. Reeves was there, calm and collected, standing before a console that controlled the entire facility. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "Neither should you," Rachel replied, leveling her sidearm. "You think this ends tonight?" "There's more, Monroe," he said, voice calm but edged with malice. "Not if I stop you now," she snapped. The ensuing confrontation was swift but tense. Rachel moved with every ounce of skill she had ever possessed. Reeves attempted to escape using the compound's internal systems, but she anticipated each move, cutting him off at every turn. Finally, she cornered him, weapon raised. "It's over, Reeves." He laughed bitterly. "You'll never understand the choices I had to make." "I understand perfectly," Rachel said. "You betrayed everything we stood for, and you'll answer for it." With Reeves captured, Rachel used his own systems to dismantle Shadow Talon's operations. The compound was neutralized, personnel secured, and evidence transmitted to military command. She had not only survived, but ensured that the rogue unit could never harm another mission. Standing atop the ridge outside the facility, Rachel looked out across the frozen valley. Snow fell gently, covering the scars of the battle, the wreckage, and the betrayal. The storm had passed, for now. "We're going home," she whispered to Harris. "Yes, Captain," he replied, awe in his voice. Rachel returned to base as a hero, officially and unofficially. Her Black Ops past was revealed, her skill unquestionable. The story of Ghost Hawk spread throughout the military as legend and reality entwined. Yet she remained humble, knowing the cost of heroism, the lives lost, the secrets kept, the betrayals endured. For Rachel Monroe, the skies were not just a place to fly. They were a place to reclaim honor, save lives, and face every storm, whether of nature, war, or betrayal. As she boarded her Black Hawk one final time, the rising sun painted the horizon in gold and crimson. She lifted off effortlessly, her rotors slicing the morning air. The wind carried her upward, free and unbound. Ghost Hawk was not just a name. Ghost Hawk was the storm, unrelenting, untamed, and unstoppable. And for the first time in years, Rachel Monroe allowed herself to smile. She had faced the impossible, survived the betrayal, and returned stronger than ever. The skies were hers, always. The world below was nothing but darkness. Jagged mountain peaks hidden beneath clouds, the night split only by the faint glow of lightning. Captain Rachel Monroe flew low, her Black Hawk slicing silently through the storm's belly. The engines hummed like a heartbeat, strong and steady. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was something far more dangerous, a hunt. 3 nights had passed since Commander Vega's secret meeting at Hangar 9. In that time, Rachel had studied the classified file he'd given her, data that revealed Shadow Talon's return. The rogue unit wasn't just targeting Raven Wing veterans. They were sabotaging U.S. military operations, selling coordinates to foreign handlers, and erasing anyone who got close. And now, Intel had traced their next move, an arms exchange in the frozen ravines of northern Alaska, under the guise of a joint training drill. Officially, Rachel wasn't even supposed to be in the air. Her mission orders were falsified under a navigation recalibration flight. But this was Raven Wing work, the kind that existed only between ghosts. Lieutenant Harris sat beside her, unaware of the full truth. "Captain, we're off-grid," he said, glancing at the radar. "No friendly signatures." "Are you sure about this?" Rachel's voice was calm, but low. "Just trust me, Lieutenant." He hesitated, then nodded. "Always?" She didn't look at him, because if she did, he'd see the doubt she was trying to hide. She knew what she was walking into. A trap, maybe. But she couldn't walk away. The valley opened below them, wide, silent, painted in silver moonlight. Rachel switched to thermal vision. At first, the screen showed only static and shadows. Then, faint red heat signatures flickered. 3 vehicles, 2 heat plumes from drones, and 1 moving target at the center. That was her mark. "Target confirmed," she murmured. "Harris, prep the external cameras. I want full visuals." As they approached, she saw the unmistakable shape of another helicopter, smaller, darker, unmarked. Its rotor blades barely glimmered under the moonlight. Her chest tightened. She recognized the model. It was one of theirs, a Raven Wing bird, now in enemy hands. "Shadow Talon," she whispered. Before Harris could reply, a voice crackled through her private comm channel, encrypted, unfamiliar, but calm. "Welcome back to the skies, Ghost Hawk." Rachel froze. Only a handful of people knew that name. "Who is this?" she demanded. "An old friend," the voice replied. Or maybe a reflection. Her blood ran cold. A reflection. That was Shadow Talon's calling sign. She banked the Black Hawk hard, pulling into a steep climb just as anti-air fire erupted from the ground. Explosions flashed across the ridge. Incoming fire. "We're hit." Harris shouted. Rachel gritted her teeth, steadying the controls. Not today. She spun the helicopter through the barrage, weaving through tracer lines with surgical precision. The Black Hawk groaned but held. Below, the enemy chopper lifted off, heading east toward the ridge. Rachel slammed the throttle forward. "We're not losing them." Harris's voice trembled. "Captain, that's a Black Ops bird, same specs as ours. You can't outrun it." "I don't need to outrun it," she said. "I just need to get close enough." The chase tore through the mountain range like a thunderstorm. 2 helicopters, one carrying truth, the other betrayal, danced between lightning bolts and death. Rachel matched every evasive maneuver perfectly. She knew their tactics because she had trained them once. She opened comms again. "You can't hide behind that signal forever." The voice laughed, Still stubborn, Ghost Hawk? You haven't changed. Did Vega tell you who sold us out? Rachel's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Your beloved commander, the voice said coldly. He traded our location for clearance, left half the team to die in Syria. We survived because we weren't naive enough to trust him. Her grip tightened. You're lying, am I? The voice hissed. He sent you here, didn't he? Told you to clean up the mess. His mess. The words hit like a knife twist. For a moment, doubt clouded her focus. Vega's file. The secret meeting. The look in his eyes. Could it be true? A missile streaked past, snapping her back to reality. Hang on, she shouted. She dove sharply, the Black Hawk plunging into a canyon so narrow that even the rotors screamed in protest. The enemy followed, matching her move for move. It was like fighting her own shadow. Back at the base, alarms blared in the control room. Colonel Reeves stared at the radar feed, watching two unidentified aircraft, performing insane maneuvers through restricted airspace. Who authorized this? He barked. A young tech officer stammered. Sir, one of the signatures matches Captain Monroe's Black Hawk, but her mission file says she's on a test flight. Reeves' jaw clenched. That's no test flight. Patch me through. Static. The comm line was dead. In the sky, Rachel and Harris fought to stay alive. Engines overheating. Harris shouted. We can't keep this up. Rachel scanned the canyon. Up ahead, a narrow pass, just wide enough for one chopper. She smirked faintly. Watch and learn. She yanked the cyclic, climbing sharply before cutting the throttle and letting gravity pull them backward. The Black Hawk flipped nose down, passing beneath the enemy bird. As they crossed, Rachel fired the flare cannon. The flare slammed into the opposing rotor, not enough to destroy, but enough to cripple. The enemy helicopter spun out, crashing into the canyon wall in a fireball of flame and twisted steel. Harris stared, wide-eyed. That was insane. Rachel exhaled. Just another Tuesday. But inside, her chest was tight, not with fear, but with grief. Because as the wreck burned, she caught a glimpse of a symbol, painted faintly on the tail, the raven wing insignia. Her heart sank. That wasn't Shadow Talon's aircraft. It was one of theirs, an old one. Her tongue crackled again, weak but clear. Ghost Hawk. It's Vega. Her pulse spiked. Commander? You weren't supposed to engage. They fed you bad intel. Someone on the inside set you up. Reeves? He's not who you think. The signal died. Rachel froze, eyes wide. Reeves, the man who defended her, protected her, stood by her, had sent her straight into a kill zone. Betrayal, full circle. Back at the base, Reeves stood before the mission map, his face shadowed in the red glow of monitors. A quiet voice came through his headset. It's done? He nodded. She's off radar. No survivors reported. Good, a voice replied coldly. We can't afford Ghost Hawk flying again. Too many secrets buried in those missions. Reeves removed the earpiece slowly, staring out the window into the night. The storm was rolling in again. Outside, far away in the mountains, Rachel Monroe's Black Hawk smoldered in the snow, half buried, silent. But deep inside that wreckage, amid the sparks and smoke, Rachel stirred. Her breathing was ragged, her vision blurred, but she was alive. Barely. She pushed herself free from the cockpit, coughing as she stumbled into the cold night air. The snow burned against her skin, the flames casting her shadow long across the ice. Reeves' betrayal burned deeper than any wound. But if they thought she was dead, then Ghost Hawk had just been reborn. And this time, she wouldn't be rescuing anyone. She'd be coming for the truth. The roar of rotor blades thundered across the mountain valley, echoing like a heartbeat through the mist. Captain Rachel Monroe gripped the cyclic, eyes narrowed against the swirling snow that battered the windshield. The Black Hawk trembled under the gale, its metal frame groaning with every gust. But she wasn't flying through a natural storm. This was chaos born of man. Below, tracer rounds arced through the fog, streaks of orange and red cutting the night apart. Smoke from burning fuel tanks rose like ghosts in the blizzard. The small recon unit she'd been sent to extract was pinned down near the ridge, and the radio was alive with frantic voices. "Ghost Hawk, this is Delta Team. We're surrounded. Need evac now." "Copy that," Rachel said, her voice steady, even as her pulse raced. "Hold your position. I'm coming in." Those words, "I'm coming in," were the same she'd said countless times during her Raven Wing years. Only back then, it was whispered over encrypted channels during missions that didn't exist. Now, she was flying with her official crew, wearing her official insignia, but the mission felt eerily familiar. The Army had reinstated her as a consultant after the Black Ops revelations. They called it operational necessity. The truth was simpler. They needed her. Someone was sabotaging Allied convoys in this frozen border zone. No one knew who. But Rachel had seen the pattern before. The flight paths, the interference, the ambush timings, they bore the mark of her old adversary. Shadow Talon. The snowstorm thickened. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Through the murk, Rachel spotted muzzle flashes on the ridge. Enemy fire pinning down the trapped soldiers. "We've got tangos on both sides," Harris shouted from the co-pilot's seat. "Hold altitude." "We go low," Rachel ordered. "Activate thermal. I want eyes on every heat source." The Black Hawk dipped sharply, cutting through the storm like a blade. Inside, the crew held on tight as bullets pinged against the hull. Rachel's hands were steady, her breathing controlled, that rare calm she always found in chaos. She spotted the team's flare through the snow, a faint green flicker near a cluster of rocks. "There! Harris, prep the hoist." "Copy that." "Hoist ready." The helicopter hovered just 20 feet above the ground. Wind and snow blasted the rescue rope sideways, but Rachel held the bird steady, fighting both the storm and the enemy fire. The first soldier hooked in and rose through the blizzard. Then another. A sudden explosion ripped the air. A nearby fuel drum went up, the blast throwing shrapnel across the ridge. The Black Hawk lurched violently. Tail rotor hit. Harris yelled. "Compensating." Rachel shouted back, muscles straining against the controls. "Keep the line steady." She fought to stabilize the aircraft as the final soldier clipped in. Bullets cracked against the fuselage. The alarm screamed. And then, silence. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. Rachel's eyes met the last soldier's as he swung beneath the chopper, his face pale, frozen in terror. "Hang on," she murmured, more to herself than to him. She pulled hard on the collective, coaxing the damaged helicopter upward. The engine screamed, but the Black Hawk obeyed, clawing its way through the storm and vanishing into the clouds. When they finally cleared the ridgeline, the crew erupted in cheers, half relief, half disbelief. Harris turned to her, breathing hard. "How did you do that, Captain?" "We should have gone down." Rachel didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the swirling snow outside. She'd flown this kind of extraction before, in a place the world pretended didn't exist. And now it was happening again. Hours later, at the forward operations base, Rachel sat in the debriefing tent, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Her fingers ached from the flight, or maybe from the memories it stirred. Colonel Reeves entered quietly, brushing snow from his jacket. His expression was grim. "Hell of a flight," he said, pulling up a chair. You saved 6 men tonight. Rachel nodded, saying nothing. Reeves watched her for a moment, then leaned forward. Intel confirmed what we suspected. That ambush wasn't random. The attackers knew our route, our timing, even the weather pattern. Her jaw tightened. You think it's internal? He hesitated. We think it's personal. Rachel's heart skipped. Reeves continued. The sabotage protocols match data we recovered from a defunct unit, codenamed Shadow Talon. You know that name, don't you? Rachel stared into her coffee, the steam curling like smoke. Yes, sir, she said softly. They were our mirror unit. Mirror? Every covert ops team has one, she explained quietly. Raven Wing saved lives. Shadow Talon erased obstacles. Reeves frowned. They went rogue after the collapse of Operation Cinderfall. Everyone assumed they were disbanded. They weren't, Rachel said. They went underground. Later that night, Rachel walked alone across the airfield, the wind biting against her skin. The snow crunched beneath her boots. In the distance, mechanics worked under floodlights, their shadows long on the frozen ground. She stopped beside her helicopter, patched, bullet-marked, but still standing. That machine was more than metal and rotors. It was the only constant in her life, the one thing that had always obeyed her, even when the world didn't. Her communicator buzzed. A message flashed across the screen, untraceable, encrypted. Meet me at Hangar 9, midnight. Come alone. RU. Her breath caught. RW, Raven Wing. She hesitated for a long moment, scanning the dark horizon. Then she turned toward the far end of the base. Hangar 9 was dark, its lights off, doors half open. The wind howled through the rafters, carrying the faint metallic scent of fuel. Rachel stepped inside, every instinct alert. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, dressed in civilian clothes, face partially hidden by the hood of a jacket. Still flying through storms, I see, the figure said. Rachel froze. She knew that voice. Commander Vega, she whispered. Her old commanding officer from Raven Wing stepped forward, older now, eyes lined with years of secrecy. Good to see you, Ghost Hawk, he said with a faint smile. You've been hard to find. Rachel's guard stayed up. You sent the message? He nodded. We've been tracking Shadow Talon. They've resurfaced, stronger, funded, and angry. And they're hunting down every Raven Wing survivor. Rachel's breath tightened. How many of us are left? 3, Vega said grimly. And one of them's gone dark. Silence hung heavy between them. I told you I was done, she said finally. No more covert missions. You don't have that luxury anymore, Vega replied. They've already found the others. You're next, Rachel. Her fists clenched at her sides. Then I'll be ready. Vega's expression softened, a flicker of pride in his eyes. You always were. He handed her a sealed file. Inside are coordinates. Your next move. Don't trust anyone outside this hangar. Not even your chain of command. And then, as quietly as he appeared, he was gone. Rachel stood alone in the dim hangar, the file heavy in her hand. Snow drifted through the open doors, cold against her skin. She looked up at her helicopter, battered, scarred, loyal, and whispered, Guess we're not done flying yet. Outside, thunder rolled once again, low and distant, like the growl of something waking beneath the storm. Ghost Hawk was back in the sky, and this time she wasn't just fighting to save others. She was fighting to survive. The storm had passed, leaving only jagged clouds hanging over the frozen valley. Captain Rachel Monroe stood amid the wreckage of her Black Hawk, the metal groaning like a wounded animal beneath the snow. Her body ached, every muscle screaming, but the fire in her eyes was sharper than ever. She had survived the crash. She had survived the betrayal. And now, she was determined to finish what had begun. Using her survival training, Rachel crawled across the ice toward higher ground, dragging her damaged flight helmet. Her comms were dead. The only sound was the wind whipping through the mountains, carrying distant echoes of the fallen helicopter and faint rumble of approaching vehicles. Through the mist, she spotted headlights, enemy drones and armored vehicles moving cautiously across the frozen terrain. Shadow Talon's men were on the move, but Rachel had a plan. She wasn't alone. From the ridge behind her, she activated a small beacon, a signal for Lieutenant Parker and the other rescued soldiers. They had followed the coordinates she had transmitted earlier, returning from temporary extraction. Their eyes widened when they saw her emerge, bruised, bloodied, but unmistakably alive. "Captain," Parker shouted. "We thought you—" "No time," Rachel cut in sharply. "We finish this now." She led them through the frozen pass, using cover, terrain, and stealth maneuvers she had perfected during Raven Wing missions. Snow crunched beneath boots, rotors hummed in the distance, the enemy's drones scanning for movement. Rachel's mind replayed the betrayal. Colonel Reeves, the man she trusted, the one who had sent her into a trap. Shadow Talon wasn't just rogue. They had insiders feeding them intelligence from inside. U.S. operations. Every move had been anticipated. And Reeves had been at the center. Her hands itched for controls, for rotors, for weapons. But tonight, her strategy required patience. Raven Wing had taught her to strike at the right moment. "Here," she whispered, pointing toward a ridge overlooking the convoy. "We control this high ground. They'll never see us until it's too late." The soldiers nodded. Every one of them was alive because of her. Every one of them was ready to trust her instinct, no matter how dangerous. From their vantage point, they observed the enemy's convoy. 2 trucks, a rogue Black Hawk, and armed personnel. Rachel's heart sank when she saw it. The stolen Raven Wing chopper, clearly repaired and modified. It belonged to one of her old team members, but in enemy hands, it had become a weapon of destruction. "That chopper," Parker said quietly. It's one of ours." Rachel's jaw tightened. "Yes, and Shadow Talon is using it against us. Let's make sure they don't get another chance." She pulled out her tablet, activating a live feed from a drone she had kept hidden on the ridge. Thermal scans showed patterns of movement, weapon placements, and vulnerable points on the vehicles. "We hit them here," Rachel said, tracing a path with her finger. "We disable the convoy, disable the chopper, and cut communications. Fast, precise, no mistakes." The team prepared. Every soldier remembered Raven Wing's training, silent approaches, rapid strikes, and flawless coordination. The first strike was swift. Rachel fired a high-powered flare at the convoy, blinding sensors and cameras. Parker and the others rushed down the slope, disabling vehicles with explosives while avoiding gunfire. Above, the rogue Black Hawk scrambled, its rotors screaming. Rachel knew she couldn't confront it head-on. She had to outsmart it. Using the terrain, she triggered a landslide on the slope below the enemy bird, forcing it into a sudden evasive maneuver. The chopper spun wildly, narrowly missing trees, skidding across ice, and crashing into the frozen valley. Flames erupted. Rachel felt a surge of relief, but she didn't allow herself to celebrate. "Move to the trucks," she shouted. The team took out communications and weapons caches, leaving the rogue unit immobilized. Shadow Talon personnel tried to regroup, but Rachel anticipated every move, flanking paths, escape routes, and weak points. Her mind was a map of tactics and contingencies, every lesson from Raven Wing sharpened into instinct. Then came the confrontation. From the wreckage, a single figure emerged, Colonel Reeves. He had arrived unexpectedly, his face cold, smug. "Impressive, Monroe," he said. "You survived the crash, but this is where it ends." Rachel's eyes blazed. "You betrayed us, Reeves. You sent me into a kill zone, used me to cover your tracks. Why?" "You don't understand," he said, raising his pistol. "Everything I did was to protect the organization. Shadow Talon was becoming a liability. They needed control. You were expendable." Her hand slid to the sidearm at her hip. "Expendable? I saved every one of them. And now it ends with you." Before he could react, Rachel sprinted forward, using ice ridges for cover. Reeves fired, but she dodged instinctively, rolling behind a snowbank. A single shot from Parker immobilized his leg. "You're done," Rachel said, approaching him slowly. "This is over." Reeves' face twisted in fury. "You think this ends tonight? You have no idea what you're up against, Ghost Hawk." "I know enough," she replied. "And it's my turn to finish the fight." She handcuffed him and secured his weapon, then turned her attention to the remaining Shadow Talon operatives. Using precision fire and coordinated movements, Rachel and her team subdued every one of them, ensuring no escape. The aftermath was quiet but heavy. Rachel and the survivors stood atop the ridge, looking down at the frozen valley, littered with the wreckage of enemy vehicles and helicopters. Snow fell gently, covering the evidence of violence, yet also symbolizing a cleansing of past treachery. Parker approached her, eyes wide. "Captain, we owe our lives to you. You saved us all, again." Rachel shook her head, her face tired but resolute. "We saved each other. That's what Raven Wing was about. That's what any of us do when we fly together." Above them, the sky began to clear, streaks of sunrise painting the horizon in gold and crimson. It was a rare, quiet moment, a fleeting peace after chaos. Back at the base, Rachel submitted her mission report. She revealed the betrayal, the Shadow Talon resurgence, and Reeves' involvement. Investigations began immediately, and classified debriefings ensued. The truth came to light. Sun in Command had turned rogue, leveraging their positions for personal gain. Yet Rachel remained calm, composed. She had survived storms, betrayals, and the shadows of her past. Commander Vega, watching from a secure location, sent a private message. "Well done, Ghost Hawk. The world knows the truth now. Take your flight. You've earned it." Rachel smiled faintly, thinking of Lavra and the other missions left behind. The friends who didn't survive, the missions that were never acknowledged. She walked to her Black Hawk, repaired, ready, waiting. The rotors spun up, low and steady. She climbed in, adjusting the controls, feeling the familiar hum beneath her hands. The aircraft responded instantly, loyal and precise, like an extension of her own body. "Time to go home," she whispered. The helicopter lifted off, soaring above the base, above the mountains, into a sky now calm and clear. For the first time in years, she flew not as Ghost Hawk, the secret operative, not as the pawn of betrayal, but as Rachel Monroe, pilot, leader, survivor. And somewhere in the clouds, far beyond the reaches of those who had tried to control her, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The storm had passed. The skies were hers. And nothing, not betrayal, not enemies, not the ghosts of the past, could ever take that away. The story ends with Rachel flying into the rising sun, a symbol of resilience, courage, and the unbroken spirit of a pilot who faced impossible odds and survived, stronger than ever.